Thanks for joining us. We have a special edition of the Reminger Report podcast on emerging technologies today, and I am joined by a special guest, Bella. I'm going to try to pronounce your last name, Jagielski. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
That's perfect.
And you are you just finished your second year of law school at Capital University Law School.
Yep. Yes, today.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
I forgot that we had emailed that you were finishing up your law school exam. And we're here because one of the things we're going to talk about today is a note that you wrote for the Capital University Law Review.
Yeah.
And it is, I don't know if the title's changed, but the title that I have is a comment on the future. Can blockchain and smart contracts move us towards decentralized justice? And so my understanding of the note, as I've read it, and kind of as you and I have talked about, is it really focuses on two large issues, both the use of smart contracts and decentralized arbitration, which is another form of decentralized justice.
Yes.
That?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, that's going to be a lot to unpack and break down, and I'm excited to talk about all of those because, frankly, I don't know that it's something that's discussed that much in the legal context.
Right.
And frankly, at least when I have informally polled some of my colleagues and other lawyers about these topics, they have given me kind of that sideways glance where they're like, Zach, are you just making stuff up to mess with me now? So I'm excited to talk to you. But before we kind of jump into the topic, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you end up in law school? I want to talk about how you got to here.
Yeah.
But how did you end up getting to law school?
Yeah. So I was always one of those kids that knew I wanted to be a lawyer at an age of 6, and I had no idea what a lawyer was. But I was also always an art nerd, and so when I was in high school, I had a really special art history teacher, and he told me about art law. And so ever since high school, I've been following this dream of art law. Obviously, things are kind of taking different directions right now, but my North Star will always be some sort of art law, I hope. I've just always knew I was going to go to law school and be an attorney, and I studied art history in undergrad, and so it was just on this track of, okay, I'm going to do the art thing, and then I'll go to law school, and then hopefully stars will align on the way out that I can work with both. But right now it's obviously going more towards technology, but as Steve Jobs has said, technology and art go hand in hand, and I do believe that. So
now, I appreciate that, and frankly, I think I agree that there's a big overlap between art and technology, especially as we build forward and towards the future. How did you get here? How did you? Because this isn't something that I was studying as a second-year law student.
No.
So how did you end up researching and focusing your law review note on smart contracts and decentralized arbitration?
Well, so in your case, you didn't start law school in a pandemic. And so my first year was all online. And personally, like everybody, I think, we were all it was weird. I felt like I was having an existential crisis doing all online schooling for my first year of law school, where I was an art history kid, like I said. So this was so I had no idea what was going on. And I would sit there with my laptop thinking my whole life exists inside this laptop. And it's crazy to me. And so my imagination was running wild. And then the stuff about NFTs came out. And so I started researching the non-fungible tokens. And that is a contentious subject, and people, have their opinions about it, and I totally am with that, and I agree. But in terms of NFTs and artists, NFTs finally are allowing artists to have royalty rights because of smart contracts. So that made me really intrigued to what a smart contract was, what is blockchain technology, because really the big thing here is blockchain technology, and that's the underlying technology that's making all of this possible. And so through researching NFTs and getting excited about that, I really just found it to be more interesting to learn about what the blockchain technology is and what we can do with that in the legal field, because as lawyers, we're not apt to change, and things are just very stagnant all the time. And so I guess just I have a crazy imagination, and that's what helped me get through my first year of law school, was just researching all this stuff that, like you said, your friends look at you like you have 6 heads, because it makes no sense for other attorneys and other lawyers. They're like, what are you talking about? A decentralized justice system? This is impossible. But we all just spent basically 2 years online, and now you can see that we're moving in a digital, or it's a digital revolution. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So really anything's possible at this point.
Yeah. So, if you could, I want to kind of take one step back, because I know that, I mean, we've already started unpacking, talking about like NFTs
Yeah.
and blockchain technology. Could you explain to me, just like from an, the 10,000 foot, I've never heard of a smart contract
Mm-hmm.
before. What is a smart contract? If you could just give me like the basic definition
Yeah.
of it.
So I think before doing that, you have to establish what the blockchain technology is,
That's
because
fair.
I think a lot of people, when they hear blockchain, they automatically think we're talking about cryptocurrency.
Absolutely. Bitcoin, right?
Bitcoin, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's not what we're talking about. Obviously, Bitcoin exists on top of the blockchain system, but blockchain technology is, like I said, the technology that is underneath all of this stuff. And so you can think of smart contracts and Bitcoin and these digital assets as applications on top of the blockchain. And they are considered decentralized applications. So in terms of a smart contract with NFTs, if an NFT is on a blockchain, and let's suppose built into the NFT is a smart contract that is saying, if a piece of art is transferred, or this NFT is transferred to someone, and there's embedded in this smart contract a 10% royalty right to an artist, as soon as it's transferred, automatically that 10% royalty of whatever they're paying for it, 10% automatically goes to the artist.
On it every time that.
Every single time it's transferred.
Okay.
So in terms of NFTs, I mean, with artists, that's just incredible, because that doesn't exist in terms of regular pieces of art.
Right, because once the artist sells a painting,
It's done for.
right, they've lost whatever
Yeah.
right they have to ever receive.
So the biggest, the one, like the normal analogy that people use for NFTs or for smart contracts, are vending machines. So you think about the vending machine is technically the first smart contract. A vending machine works on a system where you put the money into the vending machine, it verifies the money, and then automatically your candy comes out. And so that's exactly what's happening here with a smart contract. It works on an if-then function, so obviously that does leave room for error, or not a lot of room for ambiguity for attorneys in creating their own contracts.
I can't help but when you talk about like the old 90s sitcoms, and you can pick whichever one, when they're trying to use the vending machine and like the chips get stuck. You know what I mean? And I'm
Yes.
like, somebody's complied with the contract, it's
Yeah.
supposed to, but one of the things that I think you're talking about, right, is that it's like a self-executing function.
Yes, exactly.
So therefore, it's not something that requires a party to continue to essentially monitor in order to ensure compliance.
Right, and like that's, I guess, the whole purpose here is to sort of eliminate the trusted third party, who would be, the court system, or whoever. Well, in terms of decentralized justice, that would be like trying to eliminate court systems, or some like online dispute resolution systems, and just using the decentralized justice platforms that are out there currently or working on.
One of the things that I was just thinking about as we were talking about this, because I'm trying to think of like, applications where you could have these in everyday transactions. And one of the things that came to mind, at least in my head, was like in a real estate transaction where there's like an earnest money deposit, right? And usually the earnest money deposit is transferred when the property is sold. I mean, when the actual, the transaction's closed. Well, you could essentially use a smart contract in that scenario to say that when the property is sold, it immediately goes to back to the buyer, or immediately gets transferred to the seller, pursuant to the terms of the contract, and it could be self-executing. So once the property was closed, and let's say the deed is filed with the county clerk, that boom, it's self-executing.
Yeah, exactly. And that is the purpose of what they're trying to do with smart contracts. And also with the blockchain technology, this is a distributed ledger system. And so this is able to really keep all of these records on this ledger system that is supposed to, really, it's never supposed to be deleted or modified in any way unless all of these computers all decide that it can't happen, which doesn't happen. So it's really being used for so many different purposes. And in terms of like deeds and stuff, they're thinking that maybe we could keep those types of things on the blockchain. So all these records are there forever, supposedly. And we can access them anytime.
Well, I mean, the reality is that, and I think that, you're talking about, I mean, you kind of already talked about this at least a little bit, right? But like when you think about historically how deeds were stored, courthouses would burn down. I mean, I'm not like saying frequently, but there would be fires in courthouses.
Yeah.
Like deeds would be lost. And even when people started scanning deeds, it was possible that deeds got mislabeled
Right.
or they got accidentally deleted or
Yeah.
they were stored on a hard drive and that hard drive went missing, and then they started moving to the cloud, but it's still possible that cloud backup storage doesn't always work. Or so I storing it in a decentralized area certainly makes sense, at least when you
Right.
start talking about recording those transactions.
Right.
Now, when we talk about the use, so before we jump ahead, we kind of defined kind of the smart contract. And I know that these have some relation to each other, but having read your note, at least the pre-published version, the decentralized justice or decentralized arbitration, although they kind of are connected at times, they can also be, I mean, from what I was, could be separate.
Yes.
So explain to me, or just give us the kind of, again, the 10,000-foot overview of what is decentralized justice or decentralized arbitration.
So, going back to, the point about the vending machine and your candy gets stuck. So, let's suppose this is a smart contract and there's a dispute happening and, one buyer doesn't fulfill his side of the deal, and then instantly within that smart contract you can put code in there that would automatically go to a decentralized justice platform. There's the one that I talk about in my note is called Claros. So you would put their code within your smart contract, so as soon as the dispute or as soon as somebody falls through on the deal, that function automatically gets put into an arbitration function. So really, a decentralized justice platform would just be implemented into a smart contract in case something goes awry.
Now, explain to me what is decentralized arbitration, or
Yeah.
what is decentralized, justice.
So in the case of a company like Claros, what they're doing is they're taking these disputes, and they have certain courts within their system. So like software programming courts, if you have a software programming issue, you would just go to that court, or an insurance issue, you would go to the insurance court. And they have a bunch of jurors this is all based on blockchain as well. So these jurors are staking up their PNK token, which is Claros's cryptocurrency. So the jurors will stake their token, or they stake as many tokens as they can, and that's how they get chosen depending on how many tokens you stake. And so the jurors are incentivized to all vote correctly through this process, through game theory, which then once all these jurors vote correctly on this dispute, then the parties get paid out and they go their separate ways. But if they don't vote correctly, or if one juror does not vote correctly, they are disincentivized. I think it might be a fine, but it really is a lot of money involved here is kind of what it would be. But for the most part, it is all based around this game theory of what you would expect the other person to be expected.
Now, we started talking about this before we started recording.
Yeah.
Because honestly, when I was reviewing your note, even before we started talking, it's just different than when we think of jury deliberations, like in a federal courthouse or in a state courthouse, in the sense that, in those type of settings, you've got a group of jurors, whether it's 6 or 8, and there can be in that group the contrarian, the person or 2 or 3 who, no matter what everybody else says, they are going to do the exact opposite.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's for good reason, and sometimes it's just because they're the contrarian, and they're always the contrarian. And if they're always going to do the opposite of what everybody else does.
Right.
But the way you describe the juror process in this arbitration, the contrarian is then essentially punished
Yes.
for having the contrarian view.
Yeah.
And so it almost anticipates, or it almost requires the jurors to not only arrive at what they believe the correct determination to be in any sort of dispute, but also requires that they arrive at what they anticipate the other jurors
Yeah.
are going to do in the dispute,
Right.
and incentivizes them to essentially choose that outcome.
Right.
Is that
Yes, and like so, it all comes. As I was saying, there's an example that it all comes back to this theory of the game theory. And so, if you were to tell somebody in New York City, and you guys had no cell phones or anything, let's all meet at this one particular time at this one particular place, but you guys don't say where and you don't say when. Everybody would expect everybody would expect the other person to be at Grand Central Station by noon, and that just is the game theory, that's just what you would expect to do if you were in New York City and nobody had phones and nobody knew where to go. And so I think, especially in terms of Claros, obviously these are people who are choosing to be a part of this. And so I would hope that they're not just being the contrarian to be the contrarian, but there is obviously a lot of room for error.
well? And I mean, it changes, I think, too, right? What we see the decision-making process on, because, and I'm not saying that this is good or bad.
Right.
I'm just making the observation.
Yeah.
But it kind of takes that individualism away to a certain extent, and forces everybody to think about what the collective would do, or
Right.
the collective would think is the right
Right.
situation or the right outcome in a particular situation, which is just different than
What?
I don't even, and I'm not even sure that it's different in the sense that we talk about like a jury of our peers.
Yeah.
Maybe it's better. I don't know.
Right,
it's
right.
just it's just different than we think about
Yeah.
general jury
Yeah, and I think it's
deliberations.
definitely good to, all of these things are obviously in its like infancy stage, and I think it's good to be talking about it, especially when, if you think down towards the future, and you're thinking about if the internet does become a fundamental right, which I think is very debatable at this point, it might as well be a fundamental right, and if people are able to access the internet everywhere, and we can get people phones at some point, and the internet is, literally accessible everywhere through, they've talked about putting up towers and stuff across the nation to make it accessible to everybody. And so if all of these people are now able to access blockchain and these are accessible things, and we can have, I think you can take the concepts from things like Claros and these companies doing decentralized justice and think about how can we implement that into our society today if we were able to get a bunch of people access to the internet and then quicker access to judicial services. And I talk about like in what China's doing with their internet judiciary system, which I think is super interesting. They have a ton of people doing or adjudicating their disputes online, and they have a 24/7 hour access to filing disputes, paying fines, and all this stuff. And so it kind of makes you think about, so if we did that and we were implementing more internet judiciary systems in some way, more people probably would have access to these things, and maybe we wouldn't have some strange dilemma of voting upon, the common consensus.
Well, one of the things, that sticks out to me, and I think part of the thing that you're talking, and I don't want to dive too far away from it, but I think one of the things that comes to, to my mind is like the access to, is always kind of like an access to justice type issue. And one of the things that's always stuck out to me is, and you're talking about combining this form of potential decentralized arbitration and making it more readily accessible, whether it's arbitration or justice in the sense of like what China's implementing.
Yeah.
Is that when we talk about like insurance companies, the insurance industries have utilized for a long period of time what they call intercompany arbitrations, where if an insurance company has a dispute with another insurance company over, let's say, a fender bender and who caused it, and both insurance companies paid out to their claims holders, and now the fight's just between insurance company A and insurance company B, instead of necessarily taking that dispute to court, they may just arbitrate it between the two of them because they've all agreed to participate.
Yeah.
And it occurs to me that those large, commercial entities have come to the conclusion that it's more economically feasible for them to settle their disputes amongst each other, at least when it regards these issues,
Yeah.
to do it through arbitration, because otherwise it would take forever and cost them too much money, and they'd get bogged down in the system. Which then raises the question, why aren't more of us pushing for that type of resolution of some disputes that are either too small to necessarily justify or warrant a court action? It would be too costly to either prosecute or to defend. And is there not a better way to maybe resolve some of these things?
Yeah, exactly. And I know people in dealing with smart contracts and blockchain, they have been talking about using these types of things for that, exactly what you're talking about, insurance disputes, because it would just be that if then function, who's not paying out, or however that works. I really am not an insurance person.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Now, in terms of the use of these technologies, on a scale of 1 to 10, or however you want to judge this, how readily available or how frequently are these being used today? Am I unknowingly signing smart contracts like right and left and not actually knowing it? Do we see these in a particular area? What did you find in your research, or what did you see?
I think right now, obviously, like I said, this technology is really up and coming, and people are slowly catching on to what it can be used for. I mentioned in my paper, for example, Walmart uses blockchain technology for their supply chain stuff, and that has really helped them decrease disputes with their third-party providers, because this whole time, they can't find invoices and all this stuff, and they don't know when so-and-so is getting to a certain destination. But with smart contracts or with the blockchain, they're doing everything digitally now. So every single invoice is on their phone. They're signing in, checking that they're in as soon as they get to their destination and everything. And so I think I have in the statistic is it is like, less than 1%. There's been a less than 1% discrepancy rate, which was opposed to their 70% rate prior to blockchain implementation.
You talk about, that's a huge change.
Yeah, because they know exactly where everything's coming from. And I also remember reading about they're doing it for, all of their products. So they were able to track where their salmonella was coming from, because they knew exactly where this meat had come from prior, and there's no guessing about it. And so it's really, like I said, it's this digital ledger system that is storing all this information, and it can't really be disputed or argued in any way because it's right there.
Yeah. Now, I know we've kind of talked about, how these things are kind of, we anticipate, or you should say you anticipate, kind of these coming about and impacting us maybe like in our personal lives as a consumer and, as a market participant. As a legal professional, how do you think, or have you thought about or looked at how you think this might change the legal profession, moving forward as society in general starts to use more smart contracts and or potentially decentralized arbitration?
Right. Well, I think just thinking about what has happened for all of us in the past 2 years and realizing how much our lives exist on the internet and the increase in e-commerce and just all of these internet disputes that we have. It's happening every second of every day. And so I think this is creating this huge cloud of issues from the internet that we aren't really touching fully. Whereas, like I mentioned with China, they literally created an internet judiciary system solely for internet-based disputes. As we continue to see all of these internet-related disputes, I just think that there will be more people who are utilizing smart contracts and blockchain for these disputes, and from that, maybe using some sort of arbitration or an online dispute resolution within these smart contracts.
One of the things that you talked about was eBay was using, in your paper, you talked about how eBay was using a function for online dispute resolution.
Yes.
And I can't remember what the statistic was, but I do remember that when I read it, my jaw dropped, because I thought to myself, I cannot believe, let me preface this. I can believe that eBay has a lot of disputes between buyers and sellers. That part's believable. What I was shocked about was the actual number of claims that had been submitted and resolved via eBay's online dispute resolution platform. That was by 2010.
Yes.
So between early 2000s and 2010, you're talking about 60 million disputes that eBay had settled through their online platform. And one of the things as you're talking about this is the internet of the future, everything, I can't help but think about the rush to the metaverse, the rush to augmented reality, the rush to push, and now how, where a year or two ago it was a joke that people were buying this like real estate in the metaverse, right? This world of augmented reality. But that now that there are legitimate, entities who are buying this real estate for their stores, and they with the intention that someday the Nike store will be in a form of augmented reality. So as you do your online shopping, instead of looking at my iPhone, I may be putting on an AR or VR headset or virtual reality headset, and I may be walking in and looking at the shoes as if I'm in the store. And I'm thinking, you combine, as you enter into this world of augmented reality, it would be very easy to roll into a smart contract with decentralized arbitration to say, look, if you've got a dispute over the purchase of your shoes or whatever it is you're purchasing, now all of a sudden that dispute, instead of going to small claims court in Franklin County, it's going now to whatever platform you choose.
I mean, the dockets are full as they are, as we all know. And so, it's only going to get worse. And so these small disputes that are happening online, where should they be solved? I don't think we should be really wasting a lot of time in a regular courtroom if there is ways that we can just do it online, especially for, if we're talking the metaverse and something occurs in the metaverse, then shouldn't we be doing, some sort of adjudication online instead of actually going to a courtroom? Because where does this exist? It literally only exists in this virtual reality that we're set in.
Right. That's interesting. I think Kenton and I just found our new business idea, and that is a metaverse dispute resolution platform.
Yeah, there you go.
Can we cut that part out? Because I don't want anyone to steal it. As these technologies develop, are there things that are causing people to lose sleep at night, right? Are there issues that you see that are making people nervous or have people on edge, or they are identifying as an issue of a potential problem in the future?
Well, there's a huge, huge issue with blockchain technology, and it's a really humongous climate issue. Mining takes a ton of energy, and so a lot of people will probably not enjoy this podcast, so I'm really sorry, but it is a really huge issue with climate change in terms of how much energy is used to mine, and not to keep bringing up China, but they are ones who just completely banned, I believe, private use of any blockchain mining because of that reason. However, they do it themselves through their own government, but because of that reason, because the pollution is just so bad of using that energy. But people are trying to figure out how they can work around this. Right now with blockchain, I know proof of work is what is causing this energy problem because of the mining, but other companies are trying to use proof of stake, which should be more, which would allow like random computers to be doing the mining process basically, instead of these computers competing for it.
Okay.
So that's supposed to help, but I'm not sure how much it really is going to. The long-term effects of this, we just don't know.
Well, and I think one of the things too, that and I think you've probably, my understanding, just from like I said, again, the 30,000 foot, is that there are certain blockchain technologies that are more efficient or less efficient when it comes to actually running the proofs and the calculations. But I understand, and I agree. I mean, the news is littered with stories about the energy consumption as it relates, especially some of the bigger, more widely published or publicized blockchain technologies like Bitcoin. I know that there's been a lot of publications and a lot of press about their use of energy.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, these people are working on it, but with everything right now, climate change is just a huge issue in general, and I'm hopeful that there will be some sort of solution so it's not as impactful. But I think it's too early to really tell what's happening. But there's definitely a ton of issues with blockchain and smart contracts. And I know for smart contracts, a lot of attorneys are curious about whether this is actually legally enforceable. I'm almost positive it is because there has been an act for all digital, like digital signatures.
Sure.
And digital contracts are obviously.
I feel like I sign them every day when I click
Yeah.
into my computer where they're asking me to update a software and to sign some user agreement,
Yeah.
and you click and you
Right.
Right.
So they're definitely legally enforceable contracts. And then I think another issue that I came across was how can these contracts be really enforceable? Because, well, with smart contracts, there can be no modifications made once they're already implemented because that's just how the blockchain works. You can't break it. And so, there's solutions of you would make sure you memorialize a full contract, in writing first, and then within that contract you would state something along the lines of the smart contract that, include it within your real contract, and then also within the smart contract, I believe you can implement some sort of code that would refer back to your final agreement in some capacity. So there's ways around it, but they definitely are legally enforceable contracts at this point, as far as I know.
Well, what you're saying, or what you're talking about, then almost having them in counterpart, meaning you've got like a written one that you're
Yeah.
actually executing, but you're still embedding the smart contract
Yes.
aspect of it into what we would consider to be a traditional
Right.
written contract.
Right. I think that would probably right now would be the best way to go about that, just so you're covering all your bases, just in case if you do decide to use these systems that you probably should have
Right.
a traditional contract, because we're not there yet technology wise in terms of just completely going digital. So yeah.
Well, I will say that I do think we're getting a lot closer, though, because I remember, which has been 4 or 5 years ago, but when we were buying our last house, we signed all the documents via, somebody's iPad.
Yeah.
And you, not at the actual closing, but at least when we were entering into the purchase contract,
Right.
all those documents are exchanged digitally without ever.
And so at what point are we not using paper all the time and
Right.
just this is only existing through someone's iPads and we're just signing stuff off iPads all the time instead
Right.
of having to do traditional paperwork, but we're just not fully there yet. But I
Right.
think, like I said, with this past 2 years, we're seeing what can happen and where we are going in terms of technology and
Yeah.
this digital sphere, and Web3 is coming. So, and we might kind of already be in Web3 for sure, but I think there's just a lot that's going to be happening that we cannot possibly predict. They couldn't predict it 20 years ago what was going to happen when the internet came out. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, Bella, we really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. We'll be excited to reread your note when it's actually in published in
Thank
final
you.
format. It comes out, and we will be obviously interested to see where your legal career goes once you
Thank
get out
you
of
so
law
much.
school and what you do in the future.
Yeah,
Thanks for joining
thanks
us
for
today.
having
We
me.
really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
I appreciate it.